All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. We're talking about the Detroit Lions in tonight's video. Unfortunately, it's not because the Detroit Lions are 4-1 and are coming off a 47-9 road victory against the Dallas Cowgirls. It's because Aiden Hutchinson is injured. And if it wasn't for Aiden's injury in the second half against that Dallas game, that would have been one of the best Detroit Lions football games I've seen in my entire life. But unfortunately, Aiden Hutchinson is going to be down for the season. And so we saw an NFL rumor today that the Lions are expected to be aggressive in finding an Aiden Hutchinson replacement. Now, just real quick off the dome, you're not going to find an Aiden Hutchinson level replacement, but you can at least try and find somebody to fill that gap. So ESPN NFL insider Dan Graziano said today that he expects the Lions to be aggressive in their pursuit of a Hutchinson replacement, and he named the disgruntled New York Jets pass rusher Haason Reddick as a potential target. Now, this is seriously, outside of maybe losing like your starting quarterback and Jared Goff, this is one of the worst situations the Detroit Lions could have ran into this season. That's how good Aiden Hutchinson is. No other player on the Detroit Lions defense has more than 2.5 sacks this season. In fact, no other edge rusher has even 1 sack. Sorry, I just hit my elbow. 1 sack, guys. No other edge rusher on the Detroit Lions, not named Aiden Hutchinson, has 1 sack. All right. I was excited for Marcus Davenport. I think Levi and Josh and James Houston, I think these are cool players, and I get it. It's a team effort, but I still need some level of stud on the defensive side. And it doesn't have to be an edge rusher. I will just say that. Like, I'll use the Chiefs as an example. Chris Jones, the best defense player on the Chiefs, not on the edge. He's on the defensive line. And I do think guys like Carlton Davis, specifically a dude like Brian Branch, I think could be difference makers, but they're still on the younger side. So, folks, welcome back to the channel. Obviously, we're talking about the Detroit Lions in tonight's video. But before we do, if you guys enjoy it, hit that like button, hit that sub button for daily NFL content. Now, I do just want to say this. Aiden Hutchinson, NFL sack leader through the first couple of weeks. 7.5. And yep, obviously Detroit has had their bye, and Aiden Hutchinson is still leading the NFL with 7.5 sacks. But today, Lions GM Brad Holmes reportedly reached out to the New York Jets about acquiring 2-time Pro Bowl edge rusher Haason Reddick. This is, according to ESPN, okay? Now, here's where things get tough. New York reportedly would have to send a 2026 second-round pick to the Philadelphia Eagles if that happens. All right, so just real quick, let's get through this report here. According to NFL insider Jazing Anderson, New York will reportedly have to send a 2026 second-round pick to the Philadelphia Eagles, the team the Jets acquired Reddick from via trade in August, if the Jets send Reddick back into the NFC conference. So because of that, I got a quote here from CBSSports.com. Detroit will unlikely desire to hand over additional draft compensation beyond the value for a 30-year-old pass rusher who has skipped the first 6 weeks. So it's unlikely for the Lions to pull the trigger on a deal for Reddick. Then again, the Lions, who have never reached the Super Bowl, get desperate enough, anything could be possible. Highly unlikely, but possible. So I wanted to give you guys a couple of different options for Haason Reddick. Now, if there is a way to get Haason, I know he's disgruntled, and Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell and the Lions organization probably doesn't want, no team wants a disgruntled player, offense or defense. But Haason really is that good. Last season, 11 total sacks, 23 quarterback hits. The year before that with Philadelphia, once again, his first year with Philly, 5 forced fumbles, 16 total sacks. Like, this is a back-to-back Pro Bowl player. But once again, I understand wanting to keep that locker room together and not wanting to trade necessarily for a disgruntled player. I do anticipate Detroit to make some type of move. As much as I love Josh Paschal, Levi, James Houston, I do not necessarily think it's enough. I think the defense is a little bit too young. Outside of Aiden Hutchinson, there's no like alpha male in the sense of like a star defensive player. Once again, I do think guys like Terrion Arnold eventually. Brian Branch is honestly getting pretty close. I think Jack Campbell's got an interesting plot development that doesn't make sense. Player development, ascending to stardom, but still kind of not necessarily hit or miss, but he's a sophomore NFL player, right? So I don't think Detroit's going to make a crazy move for Haason Reddick, and I'll use Max Crosby. I tweeted this yesterday. I do think the Lions should give the Raiders a call for Max Crosby and give up a first-round pick or whatever it takes to get him. But to me, there's no way, there's literally no way, shape, or form that the Las Vegas Raiders trade Max Crosby. He is by far their best player on the roster, especially now that Devontae Adams is a New York Jet. I don't think Max Crosby is going to be the guy for the Lions, and I also don't think Haason Reddick is going to be. So I have a couple of players here. Trey Hendrickson is up there on my list personally, but once again, I don't think the Cincinnati Bengals are actively trying to trade Trey Hendrickson unless you give up an arm and a leg and a organ or something like that. Two players on my list personally are going to be Zadarius Smith, my former Cheesehead, and Jadeveon Clowney, my former South Carolina Gamecock. Now, Zadarius Smith, to me, is extremely doable because the Cleveland Browns suck. Enter explicit. People don't like when I do that. YouTube doesn't like it either. Zadarius is getting up there in age. He is up there in a price tag. You will not have to give the Cleveland Browns much for Zadarius Smith. When the Cleveland Browns acquired him, it was for a pair of fifth-rounders, and that was a couple of years ago. Last season, Zadarius had a very down year. He was coming off a 10-sack season with the Minnesota Vikings. But as we know with most edge rushers, the sacks don't really tell the true tale. So last year with Cleveland Browns, played in 16 games, only had 5.5 sacks, but he still had 20 quarterback hits. This year, through 6 games, he has 3 total quarterback hits and 3 sacks. So I do think that would be a decent short-term option. In fact, that would probably be my more favorite move that Detroit could make before the deadline. Now, Clowney's really interesting because he's from South Carolina. He was playing for his hometown team with Carolina. And he said recently that he's not used to losing, and Carolina's clearly, rebuilding team. Clowney would probably go for a very late round pick. Like, honestly, a 2025 7th round pick would probably land you Jadeveon Clowney. Okay. And you can still get out of his current deal at the end of this year for only $6 million in dead cap. Another decent option that I don't think would change anything too much for me would be former Chicago Bear, who's currently with the Seattle Seahawks, and Trev Gibson. So I don't think the answer is internally, just because that's how good Aiden Hutchinson is. What I do think is possible is getting a Clowney or getting a Zadarius Smith and hoping your youngsters all across the defense, not just backup edge rushers, can pick it up and play as a team and get the job done. We're fortunately for the Detroit Lions in an NFL era where I personally think offense is much more important than defense. But at the same time, defense certainly is extremely important, and you still need a good defense. So it's a weird situation. We're like 2 weeks away from the trade deadline. Lions fans especially, let me know down below what you guys want Detroit to do. Hit that like button, hit that sub button, drop that comment, and folks, we will see you in a couple of days. Peace.